The 14th century brought with it a harsh chill across Europe. From the very beginning, the land seemed cloaked in cold air that refused to leave. Fields, forests, and villages all felt the weight of this sudden change in climate. The Baltic Sea froze completely, not just once, but in repeated winters, such as those early years of the century. Imagine a great body of water turned into a solid sheet of ice, halting trade and travel, and reminding everyone how powerless they were against nature. As the years passed, the storms grew fiercer. Heavy rains pounded the earth, leaving crops soaked and homes vulnerable. Rivers swelled, and even the Caspian Sea rose in level, reshaping shores and affecting nearby communities who relied on its steady waters. What people living in that time could not understand was that they were experiencing the beginning of what today is called the Little Ice Age. It was not a true ice age, but rather a long period of cooling that changed daily life for generations. This steady drop in temperature brought disruption to farming, shortages of food, and difficulties in survival. Europe found itself struggling in a colder, wetter world, with each passing year reminding its people how fragile human life was when faced with the power of the climate. Madness, it's cold up north. During the 3 centuries between the 10th and 13th, often called the medieval warm period, populations grew in many regions to levels not reached again until centuries later. Life seemed more abundant when winters were gentler. In fact, some parts of France today still have fewer people than they did in the early 14th century. Back then, milder winters and balanced seasons allowed villages and farms to flourish, creating a contrast to the hardships that followed. The Little Ice Age was not constant, deep cold. Instead, it brought wild extremes: hail, sudden snow, summer rains that caused flooding, and winters harsher than what people were used to. It was this unpredictability that created so much suffering. Scientists believe this shift was triggered by Arctic sea ice spreading into the Atlantic. The ripple effect was devastating. In Iceland, harvests began to fail, and across Scandinavia, shorter growing seasons left farmers fearful for their future. The South was not spared. One Italian chronicle from the early 13th century describes a winter so bitter that bread, fruit, and many common foods froze solid, making them nearly impossible to eat. It was a chilling reminder of nature's power. Food had to be thawed by the fire before it could be eaten. That winter, the snow was deep, and the bitter cold lingered for months. Across Europe, families already struggling with shortages found survival harder than ever. The population had expanded rapidly during the High Middle Ages, reaching its peak at the start of the 14th century. But farming practices had not advanced enough to meet the rising demand for food, leaving many vulnerable. Much of the surplus grain could only be moved by river routes, but when waterways froze, inland towns and cities were left without supplies. Families who could not harvest enough were left to endure hunger and weakness. With weakened bodies and little resistance, communities fell victim to waves of illness. The combination of poor harvests, blocked trade, and relentless cold created widespread hardship that struck hardest at the most fragile. Between the years of 1315 and 1317, Northern Europe was struck by the Great Famine. From Poland in the east to the Alps in the south, endless rains and cool temperatures ruined harvests and left the soil too heavy to plough. Grain failed to ripen, straw could not be dried, and livestock lost their fodder. To make matters worse, sickness among cattle devastated herds. Communities turned to wild plants, roots, and nuts to survive as traditional food sources vanished.
There's nothing left.
Even the English king, Edward II, was caught in hardship when his entourage arrived at St. Albans to find no bread available. Records from Bristol describe a city so desperate that almost nothing could be spared to feed its citizens. As months dragged on, the poor suffered most. With no reserves, many slaughtered the few animals they had or ate seeds meant for planting. In some places, elders gave up their share so that the young might endure a little longer. Stories from this period would echo through folklore, inspiring tales like Hansel and Gretel. Families broke apart under the weight of hunger, and many abandoned their children, hoping at least some would find a chance to live. By the summer of 1317, the the skies finally began to clear, but widespread illness such as lung infections spread through the weakened population. It would take until 1325 before food supplies steadied once more. The toll was staggering. In northern France, about a tenth of the people perished, while in southern England the share was even greater. The Catholic Church blamed sin, but its inability to stop the suffering weakened its authority. Governments too lost credibility, as people accused them of failing to respond to the crisis. Rising crime in the following decades further eroded trust. In England, anger turned toward King Edward II, hastening his downfall. In the year 1362, northwestern Europe was struck by a massive extratropical storm. In England, it became known as the Great Wind, while in Denmark it was remembered as the Great Drowning of Men. Coastal towns were devastated. Along the shores of the Netherlands, storm tides swept inland, overwhelming entire districts. Similar destruction struck Denmark, England, and the German coast. The seas surged to heights more than 5 meters above normal levels. Records tell of earlier floods as well. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle notes that in London during the festival of St. Martin in the year 1099, the sea rose to a height no one living could recall experiencing before. The year 1212 was particularly severe, with tens of thousands of lives lost in the Netherlands alone. Floodwaters reshaped the land, leaving communities in shock and altering coastlines for generations. On November 19, 1404, the first St. Elizabeth flood struck Belgium and the Netherlands, taking land and homes. 17 years later, another flood hit the same region, with rains and high river waters making the disaster even worse. On January 15, 1362, the St. Mary's Day storm swept across southern England, then moved over the North Sea to Denmark and Germany the following morning. An anonymous writer in Canterbury described the chaos in vivid detail. He spoke of houses losing their roofs, trees torn from the ground, and people unable to find safe shelter. The storm was blamed on an upcoming joust, seen by some as sinful distractions that pulled warriors away from crusades.
The heavens wept.
Another chronicle, the Eulogium Historiarum, interpreted the storm as divine punishment, reflecting the belief of the age that natural disasters were signs of higher judgment rather than shifts in weather and climate. The winter of 1363–64 was severe, not only in the north but also in southern Europe. The Venetian lagoon froze solid, and the estuary of the Rhone turned to ice. Snow lingered in towns of Belgium for 100 days. With no thermometers yet, chroniclers describe the danger by recounting the depth of snow, unyielding frost, and the toll on crops and livestock. An English poem claimed the winter of 1317–18 was 1,000 times colder than before. In the 1430s, a French scribe noted that for 3 centuries, no winters had been so bitter. A German record even claimed it was the coldest since the birth of Christ. Rivers like the Mover froze solid for months, used daily as walking paths. Snow covered Florence for an entire month in February of 1352. In Belgium, winters brought over 15 weeks of frost, while Cologne endured 36 days of unbroken snow, testing the endurance of all who lived through it. Even Italy, known for its gentle winters, faced extraordinary snowfalls. Drifts rose so high that people shoveled it from rooftops into the streets, blocking towns and trapping families indoors for days. Bologna was buried under immense depth. In the year 1442, Margaret of Anjou, queen to the French king Charles VII, was stranded for 3 months in Carcassonne when snow reached astonishing levels. Travel was impossible, and entire regions were cut off. Southern France also suffered in 1389 when heavy snow across Languedoc destroyed farms and homes. Chroniclers noted that people died from collapsed houses, exposure to the cold, and hunger as supplies ran out. Food shortages became the greatest hardship. With rivers and roads frozen, transportation stopped. In the winter of 1432 to 33, German rivers carried no fuel for heating, and watermills broke under the weight of ice. In Montpellier, a record tells of a homeless man who perished on the street from the bitter cold. A Parisian writer described the same winter of 1437 to 38, noting people dying outdoors as frost lingered. That same season, reports from Germany spoke of cattle succumbing to the weather. With harvests weak, transport blocked, and animals lost, survival became uncertain, reminding everyone how vulnerable medieval life was to climate.
Another chilly day on the rise.
It was not all hardship. Medieval communities proved resilient and often turned harsh winters into moments of joy. In 14th century Cologne, a bustling market was held on the frozen Rhine, drawing crowds onto the ice.
A blessing in disguise, my friend.
In Italy during the early 13th century, jousts were even held on frozen rivers. In Cologne, people built houses from snow and sculpted animals like bears and lions, turning nature's challenge into creative celebration. When the great snowfall of 1434 arrived, people took to sledding and having snowball fights. Despite the cold and the struggle, laughter echoed in the streets, reminding us that even in difficult times, joy could be found.